Hello, my sexy listeners. It's that podcast girl Cdub, and this is season 4 of This is a Podcast About House Music. And this season, we're doing something different. We're treating the history of this genre like a case file, because y'all love some true crime podcasts. Case file number 1, the question everybody thinks they already know the answer to. Who invented house music? You go around, ask a casual fan, and you'll get one name back almost every time. Frankie Knuckles at the Warehouse. Chicago. Done. Next question. And look, that answer isn't wrong exactly. It's the same way Al Capone ran Chicago isn't wrong. It's true enough to repeat at a party. It just isn't the whole file. Because the second you start pulling threads, you find other names insisting they belong in the story too. A guy named Jesse Saunders who says he made the first house record on vinyl that you could actually buy. Another guy named Chip E who says Saunders is wrong and that his record is the one that actually invented something new. A DJ named Ron Hardy at a club called the Music Box, where songs didn't get released so much as they got put on trial in front of a dance floor that couldn't make you or break you in real time. So here's the case we're opening today. Not who did it, because it isn't a crime. The case is this. How did the story get this scattered? And what were we actually looking for when we asked the question in the first place? Let's start with what we thought we knew, because you have to state the assumption clearly before you can take it apart. The assumption is this. Frankie Knuckles invented house music at a club called the Warehouse. Here's the version of that story you've probably heard. 1977. A club owner named Robert Williams opens a members-only spot at 206 South Jefferson Street in Chicago. He brings in a DJ from New York, Frankie Knuckles, to run the booth. The crowd is black, Latino, largely gay, and they are there to dance in a way that most of America's clubs were not built for at the time. Knuckles plays disco, imports, reworked soul and funk records, stretching songs out, building the night like it's one long piece of music instead of a sequence of singles. And then, as the story goes, kids around the city start going to record stores asking for that music they play at the Warehouse. Somebody shortens it. House music. A genre gets its name from a building. Yes, it's a great story. It's got a location, it's got a hero, it's got an origin myth as clean as anything Marvel ever put out. Frankie Knuckles becomes the godfather of house, and the case, as far as most people are concerned, is closed. But here's the thing about clean stories. They're usually hiding a body. So let's actually build the case file. The Warehouse is real. It opened in 1977 and operated until 1982. And Chicago's own city landmark records confirm that this was the room where Frankie Knuckles helped shape what would become house music. That's not folklore. That's in a municipal document. But here's the complication. In its early years, the Warehouse wasn't playing house records. There's no such thing yet. It was playing disco, it was playing imports, and reworked soul and funk cut up and extended for the dance floor. The Warehouse might be the birthplace of a culture and a name, but it was not in its first years the birthplace of a recorded genre. Those are two different crime scenes, and we've been treating them like one. Frankie Knuckles earns the title Godfather, honestly. He came out from New York after Larry Levan, a legendary DJ in his own right, turned the Warehouse residency down. Knuckles spent years building that room into one of the most important spaces in Chicago nightlife. But, and this is the complication that keeps showing up in this case, Frankie Knuckles didn't make the records. He only shaped the room. He didn't stamp the vinyl. If the question you're actually asking is who made the first house record, Frankie's name doesn't even come up first. Which brings us to our next suspect. In 1984, a DJ named Jesse Saunders releases a track called On his own label, Just Say Records. It's built around a Roland 808 drum machine, and it's widely cited, including by most historical accounts, as the first house record ever pressed on vinyl. This is genuinely different claim than invented house. This has made house into a product. Before Saunders, house was something you experienced live in a room mixed by a DJ. After Saunders, house was something you could hold in your hands and sell. But, and here's where the case file gets messy, not everyone agrees On and On deserves that crown. Which brings us to our fourth suspect, who has a bone to pick with you. Chip E released the Jack's Tracks EP in 1985, featuring 2 tracks, It's House and Time to Jack, that a lot of historians point to as the actual blueprint for the drum machine-driven Chicago sound. And Chip E himself has made a pointed argument over the years that Jesse Saunders' On and On was really a rebuild of an existing disco edit, not a new piece of music, while his own record, It's House, was something genuinely new. New enough, in fact, to be the first record to use the word house as the name of his specific sound. Sit with that for a second. We have 2 men, both with legitimate claims, both pointing at the same 18-month window, and they don't agree on what a first even means. Is the first house record the first record made for house DJs? Or the first record that sounds unmistakably like nothing that came before it? That's not a factual dispute, that's a definitional one. And definitional disputes are the hardest kind to close. While Saunders and Chippy are pressing records, across town a DJ named Ron Hardy is running a club called the Music Box, a louder, rawer, more experimental place than the Warehouse ever was. And the Music Box becomes something like a forensic lab for this new sound. Producers like Marshall Jefferson, Larry Hurd, DJ Pierre, Chippy himself bring Hardy their new tracks and test them live in real time against a dance floor that does not lie. The most famous story here involves a track called Acid Tracks by a group called Future. By most accounts, it cleared the dance floor multiple times before the crowd finally turned around and embraced it. So that's not a marketing plan, that's trial by jury. Ron Hardy didn't invent a sound, he was the pressure chamber the sound had to survive. By 1986, house has a name, it has records, it has a testing ground. What it doesn't fully have yet is an anthem, something big enough to carry the feeling of the whole movement. That's what Marshall Jefferson supplies with Move Your Body, a track built around piano and vocals that becomes known simply as the house music anthem. It reportedly caught fire in Chicago clubs before it was even officially released, the room deciding again ahead of the market. Jefferson didn't invent house. By 1986, that ship had sailed. What he did was prove the sound could hold real emotional weight, not just a rhythm to move to, but a feeling to mean something by. So here's where we are. 6 suspects, all of them credible. None of them guilty of the full crime, because the crime, if we can even call it that, doesn't have a single perpetrator. Let's lay out the contradictions plainly, because this is the part your case file wants you to sit with. Contradiction 1. Frankie invented house, and Jesse made the first house record, are not the same claim, even though they get used interchangeably. One is about a room, the other is about a product. We've been treating a culture and a commodity as if they're the same event. Contradiction 2. The Warehouse gets you the name, the Music Box gets you the sound getting tested under fire. That's 2 different clubs with 2 different jobs. Contradiction 3, and this one's the sneaky one. House was new and house came from disco, are both true at the same time. House didn't spring out of silence, it grew directly out of disco's afterlife. Out of the records Frankie Knuckles was already playing at the Warehouse before a single house record existed. What made it new wasn't the raw material. It was what Chicago producers did to that material with drum machines, repetition, and a room full of people demanding something built specifically for them. Contradiction 4, the big one. The one this whole season is going to keep circling back to. One person invented it versus a community made it. We love inventor stories. They're simple and they fit into a box. But club culture was never simple. It was bodies, money, sound systems, danger, desire, timing, and a lot of people who were not being centered anywhere else in American culture. Finding a room where, for one night, they were. So I'll be honest with you about something. When I started pulling this file together, I thought I was building toward a verdict. I thought somewhere in these interviews and these records and these club histories, there was going to be a name I could put a stamp next to and say, yep, that's the one, case closed. But the evidence kept refusing to behave. If I followed the name, I ended up at the warehouse. If I followed the DJ, I ended up with Frankie Knuckles. If I followed the first record, I ended up with Jesse Saunders. If I followed the raw sound of the dance floor, I end up with Ron Hardy. If I followed the words house and Jack, I end up with Chip E. If I followed the anthem, I ended up with Marshall Jefferson. And that's when the case changed on me. Maybe the problem was never that nobody could agree. Maybe the problem was that everyone was holding a different piece of the exact same story, and we kept asking them to hand over the whole thing when none of them ever had it. So, who invented house music? Here's the honest answer the file actually supports. No one, and also everyone in that room. Frankie didn't invent every record. Jesse didn't invent every dance floor. Ron didn't invent every machine, and Chip didn't invent every word. Marshall didn't invent every feeling. But together in sequence, in argument, in competition, sometimes in direct contradiction of each other, they explained how house became house. A genre isn't born like a baby. It doesn't arrive with one parent and a signed certificate. Sometimes a genre is more like a neighborhood. People move in. They bring what they have. Someone changes the lights. Someone opens the door. Someone plays that record again, a little longer this time. Someone dances differently than anyone expects them to. And eventually, someone gives the whole thing a name. Years later, the world looks back and asks, who built this? But by then, the music's already moved on without waiting for an answer. Next time, we follow the record itself. Because once house left the club and landed on vinyl, something strange started happening to it. The songs got longer. The intros stretched out until they didn't sound like intros anymore. They sounded like their own destination. The drums took over the whole room, and the 3-minute pop single, the format that entire music industry had been built around, suddenly wasn't big enough to hold what these producers were trying to say. So next time, who invented the house record? And why did it refuse to sound like anything the radio was ready for? Well, that's all for today, folks. I'm that podcast girl Cdub, and this is a podcast about house music. Until next time, keep the beats alive.